Hello and welcome to the Planter Podcast, where we talk about veggie gardening and try to make it easier for you to grow food. I'm one of your hosts, Peter, and I, until this year, have been growing in a community garden.
I'm Milan. I'm a home gardener here in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm Erin. I'm a market gardener in Huron County, Canada.
All right, and we have a very fun podcast episode today because we're going to be talking about our garden plans for 2025 and
Woohoo!
maybe some seed starting tips. Who knows? Yeah, if we get to it. All right. Who wants to go first? Uh,
I don't mind if you get mine
you,
loaded up. I can go.
yep, I can show. So, Mylan, I got your slides right here.
Perfect. And so visual, for the viewing audience, I should say, um, I have two main plots. My front side yard, I have a 20-foot by 3-foot bed, and then I have two 4-foot by 8-foot beds. And so I have a secondary plot in my backyard as well that is three, like 4 by 8 beds, and one is a 2 by 6 or something along those lines. And so I get full sun in the front yard bed, which is the one that's on the screen now. Yeah, full sun from morning till late in the evening. And so this one at the top, this is what I call my market style bed, with it being the 20 foot in length.
It's long. Jeez.
Yeah, it is a monster. It required somewhere along the lines of 7 cubic feet of soil, because it is around 18 inches deep as well. It's a big raised bed, and I have a hoop system built into it as well.
Very cool.
So it allows me to do year round gardening. The hoops, I can put either frost cloth or shade cloth, or maybe even plastic if I really wanted to, but we tend to get a little too hot still, even in winter, for the low plastic. So I typically
Mm.
go with frost cloth. Although, truth be told, I missed the weather forecast this year a couple of weeks ago, where I knew we had low 20s. And so everything I had in that, I thought it'd be okay with the low 20s. And then somewhere out of the blue, one of those days, it was like, oh no, we're going all the way down to like 10 to 14. And I just didn't have time to get them covered. And so I had collards and some turnips, carrots, beets, a lot of cool season stuff that, is typically okay. But the beets got burned up pretty bad, so that the turnip leaves and a few other things.
Is this
Carrots got
was
eat
that
up.
when you got a bunch of snow too in Atlanta?
Yeah, so we had the strangest thing ever. We had snow 2 weeks in a row in Atlanta, and I've lived here my entire life, and I've never seen that. We had 1 week of just pure snow, of like what you all experienced, and that was awesome, because it was just low 30s. Like, it wasn't even super super cold, and it was the nice fluffy snow that we are used to seeing on television.
Hmm.
And so that was awesome. You saw all over social media, everybody was hanging out in the snow, having the best time. And then the following week, we got what we normally get, which isn't snow at all. It's ice. It's
Oh
ice
no.
pellets that accumulate. And that day, temps dropped really, really fast. So school was out, but a lot of people still went to work. And then right about 4 o'clock, I could start hearing people's tires spinning out on the road. And I was like, oh no,
Oh
that
no.
means the ice is here. And so, from no joke, from 4 to 6, the roads just iced over all over the city. I had neighbors that were having to walk home, abandon their cars, because it's a super hilly neighborhood. And so that was the one that came along and did the killing frost. That's what took out the stuff, because the like my broccoli, which I knew broccoli was cool season, pretty hardy, but it didn't handle the hard frost down to 14, which is really interesting. The heads looked okay, but the stems actually froze and
Mm.
then ruptured. So you go to harvest and the stem just is mush in your hand. So that's a lesson
Uh,
learned.
that's disappointing.
Yeah, for sure.
But I see now you've got your warm season plan ready to go up there. You got
We
your
are
tomatoes. So that's something to look forward to, at least.
I am so looking forward to it. I'm already thinking about salsa and my tomatoes and peppers and everything. So what I did with this one is at the 20-foot spacing, that'll give me roughly room for 7 varieties of tomatoes. And I'm doing all determinate variety in this bed. Based off some experimentation in the past, the indeterminates grow so well in those deep raised beds that they want so shorter beds with a trellising system already in place. So I'm doing 2 rounds of determinate. I'll grow this first round. My first, I'm sorry, my frost date is last frost date is predicted to be somewhere around April 5th, somewhere in there. And so I'll grow the first round until mid July, which is where we typically get a 2-week heat wave where temps are 95 and above. And that typically wipes out everything. But if I can time this right, that'll finish out most of the determinate tomatoes. And I'll be ready to plant a second round as soon as those are done to carry me all the way through fall.
Nice.
So what I also did on this back row is tucked in lettuce plants in between the tomatoes that I'm hoping the shade will allow those to grow and not get the full blast of the sun in this
Yeah,
Atlanta
hopefully they
heat.
won't bolt then. Yeah.
I think they will. I don't have the best luck with lettuce. It's always funny to me that lettuce is a cool season crop, and the last thing I want when it's cold outside is a salad. So we'll see if we can get some during the summer. And then
Do you want me to switch to your backyard garden plan?
yeah, you can.
Okay. I don't know if you can do it too, but
Oh,
let's
well,
just.
that was in place now. So these 4 beds, I'm instead of doing the interplanting like I did in the front yard, I'm going to do 2 that are monocrop. So 3 that are monocrop. I want 1 that is just for the sweet potatoes, 1 that's just for the watermelons, and then one of the smaller ones is going to be just corn. And the corn and the watermelon I did for the first time last year, and I have to have them again. So I'm dedicating beds to them to make sure that I get ample harvest. And then this last one, I really want to do a 3 sisters garden. So
Oh,
corn on the
nice.
back row, pole beans just in front of it, allowing the pole beans to climb the corn, and then squash on the front row.
Very
I've
cool.
I've tried that before, where they were all on top of each other and it did not turn out well. So hopefully you have success
Yeah,
keeping
I've
them
seen it,
spaced out.
in theory. I've seen the theory, and it's been one of those things I haven't tried and I really want to try. But that's also why I'm doing another bed of corn just in case.
What kind of corn do you grow?
It's a sweet variety.
Sweet corn?
I just looked it up. Yeah, I forget the exact one, but it's a really, really sweet one. Um, Last year was so funny. I only did the small bed, and I did get corn, but I didn't plant quite enough.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone I literally ate right out in the garden. It didn't even make it in the house. I pulled them right off the plant, and each day I just go out and pull a fresh one, and that just was the best experience with growing those. So I'm really looking
That's
forward to doing
awesome.
those again.
Yeah, that's the main thing with corn, right? You just need a big enough stand to make sure it gets, because it's wind pollinated, you need enough
Mhm.
corn in the area to make sure that it gets good pollination. And it looks like you've got ample there, so you should be good.
Yeah, so that's somewhere around 2 by 8. And I'll be planting somewhere in between 2 to 4 per square foot. Um, but that I was a little bit more spread out. I think I only did 1 or 2 per square foot last year. So
Hmm.
that I did get some, and they did pollinate fairly well. They weren't picture perfect
Mhm.
ears, but the more I garden and the more I learn, I'm trying to let go of that picture perfect grocery store looking thing, crop for everything. I've learned that, things don't always grow perfect. And just because you got incomplete pollination, it's still perfectly good, perfectly ready to eat. So I won't mind that.
Yeah, that's part of the fun. What fun is it
Absolutely.
if your eggplants don't have noses and
Right.
your zucchini isn't growing in a circle?
Yeah, if it doesn't have a thumb or some weird thing on it.
That's awesome. And it looks like you've leaned pretty heavily into beans this year too, eh?
Yeah, so I am going to do the pole beans back here. Like I said, to go up the corn, just to have enough to really harvest. And I like to freeze some this year. I did not get enough to freeze last year.
Mhm.
And then you would have saw them also the front row of the 20-foot bed. I am interplanting bush beans there.
Yeah. I
So
was
I
thinking
get the
those might be
best of
bush
both
beans.
worlds. Yep.
Now, do you have a trellis for those tomatoes or some way to, how are you supporting
For
those?
these, I am doing the Texas tomato cages. I haven't, I didn't like the trellis systems that I've had in the past. And so I did a little research and invested in big, they are 24 inches in diameter, I want to say.
Wow.
So they're pretty big. They're metal, but they fold down really, really well. And so for the determinate bush varieties, they don't need really, really tall support, but they
Mhm.
do need, pretty ample support.
Sturdy. Yeah.
Sturdy, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I am doing Romas, slicers, and like a medium variety of tomatoes for indeterminate variety. I'm sorry, determinate varieties.
Mhm.
So they'll need some pretty strong support.
Nice.
And do you trellis
Awesome.
your, I see cucumbers there too. Do you trellis those
I
or,
do trellis this bed. So
okay.
this bed actually has a trellis system along this line. And so I'm doing 4 along that back row, which is why I was just doing the research with Aaron on the how many per square foot and looking up the square foot gardening recommendations. I think I did 2 per square foot last year, and that just was a little too dense once the plants actually start climbing and
Mhm.
producing runners. So I like their new recommendations of 1 per square foot, but I'm still going to space them out, skipping 1 just to allow them to climb. And based off of that same timing that I had with the determinate tomatoes, I'll let these first 4 grow during the first half of summer. And then once that heat wave comes in and wipes everything out, I'll plant in those slots next to those.
So you've got your dill lined up there, ready to go too.
Yes, because
Are
I
you doing some
need
pickling?
pickles. I
Nice.
need my pickles. I'm looking forward to them so bad. And
That's
then just
awesome.
doing some honeydew and cantaloupe in front of those.
Have you grown honeydew and cantaloupe
I
before?
did in this area right here, but they did not get to harvest because my timing was off and that heat wave hit just as they were starting to fruit.
Hmm.
And so I just didn't get them to harvest. For us, it's all about that July heat wave. You've got to get stuff in the ground in enough time to get harvested before that, and then we have essentially a second summer
Mhm.
after that. But I'm locked in on my timing this year. And
Nice.
then this bed is I am going to do indeterminate tomatoes just in this bed because I have a string trellis system that I want to experiment with there. So I'll do the smaller, I'm sorry, Romas or cherries that I can let climb in that bed.
And then for
And
your peppers, it looks like you've got, is it all bells you're planning to grow? Do
I
you do
did not
any hot
change the
peppers?
icon. I didn't change
Oh,
the
okay.
icon. I got to tweak that. So I am doing Cal Wonder Bells. I'm doing jalapenos, and serranos are the 3 main ones I want to do. I may sneak in a chili somewhere in there, but that'll be along that front row of the market bed. And then nasturtiums and marigolds I'll be sprinkling around essentially
Yeah.
wherever there's an open spot.
Once you get the nasturtiums out, they just like grow like a weed. I
I
actually
have
had to cut
not
mine. Really?
I have
Okay.
not had good luck with them. The heat
Oh,
down here seems to struggle with them. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I had to
geez.
cut mine back multiple times because they were shading out my tomatillos. They were
Oh
just,
wow. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty
So
tangly and
I
aggressive.
may have to rethink. I may put those in some containers instead, then, just in case I actually have luck this time.
they won't spread. They'll just get, if they take off, they'll be like, I got a big bush, but that
You
it's,
can maybe just push them down so they drape over the side of the bed.
That
So you
was
just
my
like
goal of putting them
orient
in the
them.
corners. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was my goal of letting them hang off the side of the beds. Like I said, the beds are roughly 18 and 20 inches high. So I thought if they did get long, they'll just kind of hang off. I thought that'd be nice visually.
yeah.
So what's the craziest new thing that you're trying this year? Do you have anything in your lineup that
So
you're
the
super
sweet
jazzed about?
potatoes are the one that I am really, really honing in on this year because I did try them last year. I planted them in the market bed interplanted with other stuff, and I was not prepared for how much they would spread and how quickly they would spread.
Mhm.
So within 2 weeks, they had started to take over that bed, and I had to go and rip them out. So that is what I'm looking for nailing down this year. And the other thing that I didn't do, and I got to find space for, I may have to do some containers, but I need some okra this year too.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I'll
Sounds
be
good.
watching y'all's plans too, just to see what I missed and where I can squeeze in some more.
Speaking of other plans, let's talk about Aaron's plan. It's a big one.
It's
Wow.
rather large, yes. So, my husband and I just purchased a property that has some land, which is exciting. I had the goal of starting my
Yeah.
own market garden. I previously worked at a market garden, but I had the goal of starting my own because um, even in my off hours, I'd be gardening in our backyard, but it was just, tiny, tiny postage stamp style yard, which you can still generate a huge amount of produce out of. And we were, but this is just kind of exciting and just like taking it to the next level. So the way I used Planter for this plan, I did all my initial planning in a spreadsheet just for a couple reasons. One is because I'm connecting it to sales forecasts and costing and different things that kind of, make sense from the business side. So spreadsheets kind of make it easy to crunch all those numbers. And then also just for the market gardening comes down to a lot of repetition. So you're, doing successions every week or every other week. So just to get that timing down. But then once I got that all in the spreadsheet, I used Planter to develop the visual. And that was really key for me for a couple of reasons. So one was in the spreadsheet, it's really difficult. I mean, unless you're, going to be super creative, it's very difficult to get a really good visual sense of where everything is. Or you kind of have to do it very, very manually. It's very labor intensive. So Planter with the icons, it just totally brings it to life. And you can see at a glance, okay, these are my carrots, these are my onions, these are my tomatillos, right? And then the other thing is the drag and drop, which again, in a spreadsheet, you'd either have to do it manually or you'd have to have some really fancy dancy calculations in the backgrounds. But with Planter, I can just drag things and play around until I'm happy with the format. And I actually found a couple of things when I was doing this. So one was I wanted more of my greens to the front because I know it might get a little bit more shade up there. So that was one thing that kind of caught my attention right away was okay, I want to group all my, greens and things that can take a tiny bit of shade and put them more towards the front. And then the other thing was timing wise, I wanted to make sure that we're building our beds in a way that makes sense so that we don't have, different holes kind of in between the seasons. So that was the other thing. I was able to kind of use Planter to easily manipulate my crops. So I can say, okay, these are the ones that are going in the earliest. These ones are coming in a few weeks later. These ones are coming in kind of towards the tail end, and that'll make sense as we're actually building out the beds in the spring. So each of these, each of these represents a 50-foot bed. And I didn't put in all the different icons I just used 2 squares basically to represent the 50 feet, because there's some.
So each square is 25 foot long, is basically.
Exactly. So most
Wow.
of them I'm planting 50-foot beds at a time, but there are a couple where I'm doing 2 iterations of 25 feet, or there's the one in the top corner where I've got both arugula and mustard in the same bed. So that's kind of why the 2 squares came in. And then again, the spacing, it's a little bit different because we're just using like intensive row crop spacing, but the overall visual is what was absolutely key for me, and it really let me dial in and catch a few things that didn't really make sense when I was able to see them. So yeah, and we've got a little bit of everything in here. So we've got spinach, lettuce, mesclun, kohlrabi. I'm super excited about. I actually have not grown kohlrabi. I've grown other brassicas, but I'm excited to try kohlrabi specifically because it is a faster growing brassica. And I have tasted it, and it's amazing. So as long as I can get them to bulb and not crack, it should be a good crop to have.
That's one. Do you worry about at the market garden being able to sell these? Because like people like me, I saw someone with this gorgeous kohlrabi. They had a picture of it, and I'm like, well, that's cool. How do you eat it? Because I've never eaten one. So do you
Yeah,
worry
I think
about selling odd plants like that?
a little bit, yeah. And that's where you definitely have to be careful. So like one, for example, that I just off the top of my head, cucamelons. I grew cucamelons last year. I love them, but I can tell from the taste that they're definitely not for everyone. And then
Hmm.
also in terms of uses, like there's kind of a few very specific use cases, and the plants are not super high yielding. So I kind of put all those factors together, and it's like, yeah, as much as I love cucamelons, it just doesn't really make sense. Kohlrabi, I'm a little more optimistic about because it's more familiar. Like you can use it in coleslaws, you can use it in a lot of the ways that you would use your traditional brassicas. And sometimes there's something to be said for growing something that's a little bit different than what people can get at the grocery store, as long as it's not, so out there that there's absolutely no market for it. So I'm hoping that this hits that sweet spot of like, it's still a very usable vegetable with a, relatively familiar flavor profile. So we'll see. And then if not, we'll just have to eat a heck of a lot of kohlrabi and give it to all our friends
Yeah.
and
Well,
cut it out next year.
if it makes you feel any better, I discovered kohlrabi for the first time at a farmer's market a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, and I've been obsessed with trying to grow it ever since. So I think that one will do really well.
Yep. Just
You're
got to
growing a
keep the
lot of.
water on it, keep it from cracking. That's my goal.
So I see you got kohlrabi in the upper right and also down at the bottom. So you're growing quite a bit of it.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's the timing thing. So the one in the upper right is going to be the spring planting. So again, planting those upper beds first. The one
okay.
in the bottom kind of middle, that's going to be the fall planting. So that
Oh,
bed will
okay.
be built, amongst the latest in the
So
season.
you can work your way back as because you're going to be building these beds as you go too.
Exactly.
It's a
This
lot of work.
field is going to turn into garden beds. So yeah, so if we can, space that out, because the problem is you have to get it all measured out, right? And if you have gaps in the middle, you still have to kind of figure out where those are going to go. So it's just a little bit easier if you can, kind of block it out. Also, if you're using, tarps or anything like that, if the beds that are coming up to be planted next are side by side, you can just put one tarp, over
Yeah.
4 or 5, 6 beds at a time kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can optimize for. This is, my first pass. I definitely like to keep related crops in the same area. Like rather than building it totally sequentially, I've got all my spinach iterations nearby. So there will be a few holes in there.
Mhm.
But to me, it's more important to have the same crops near each other just to make it, quick and easy to harvest. So, and then you can also optimize for like, okay, where are my, am I going to need netting? Where am I going to need, trellising and those kinds of infrastructure things too. So, yeah. And then we're leaning heavily into lots of Latin American items. My husband's from Mexico, so we have to have those things, and we're excited about them, and we're hoping that excitement carries through from the marketing side as well. So we've got lots of tomatillos, we've got serranos, anchos, jalapenos. So again, that's going to be one of those scenarios where, we're hoping between the market and maybe making a few connections, maybe with some Latin restaurants, we can market all that stuff. But worst case scenario, we're going to be pickling and freezing a lot of peppers.
You did mention that the beds were 50 feet long. How wide are they?
30 inch. Yeah. 30 inch is a pretty typical market garden standard. There's a lot of tools that are designed for 30-inch beds. So
got it.
Yeah.
And are you hand planting everything, or will you be getting into the different cedars and all of that?
So we have an earthway. So where I was working, we use the Jang, which is like the creme de la creme of cedars, but they are very pricey. So I have an earthway that I'm going to try out. I know people complain a little bit about the earthway being not as precise as the Jang. So we'll see how that goes, do our best with the earthway. That might require some thinning or, something of that nature that you wouldn't have to do with the Jang. But that's kind of the plan, is to start with the earthway. The earthway is considered kind of like your entry level cedar. So it's even good, even if you're not a market gardener, even if you're a backyard gardener that, has some larger beds, the earthway is a nice kind of entry level cedar. People really like it for beans and peas. So, Milan, you're doing a lot of beans, maybe an earthway, although your beds are raised, so it might be a little bit trickier.
Mine are raised, and I don't quite do the rows quite as intensely. Mine are more just like a couple square foot here and there. So, but I'll never turn down an opportunity to test out a new gadget. So I'll find a way.
That's the thing. You can always find the spot. So so we're going to start with the earthway. We'll see. Again, I'm a little curious to see how it handles some of the smaller seeded crops. We also use a 6-row cedar. The one I'm familiar with is one from Johnny's, and that does really good with your tiny, like your arugula, your radishes, your baby kale, stuff like that. So again, we'll see. We'll see how the earthway hacks it, and if it's just getting really frustrating, then maybe more investment will be in order. And then obviously lots of transplanting too. There's a lot of things, interestingly, in the market garden world where, people say you can't transplant them, but we do. Like zucchini is a really classic example. Even spinach sometimes makes sense to transplant, just from a, space efficiency and, getting optimal germination point of view. So there's definitely a significant, proportion of transplanting as well. And the transplanting by hand is very time consuming.
Yeah.
What about beets? Have you done those transplanting? I saw Charles Dowding did a YouTube on transplanting those.
Yes. So beets is super, super interesting. So I have seen both recommendations. So a lot of your traditional gardening sources say to direct seed your beets and that they don't transplant well. But then you do have, Charles Dowding, and then there's other market gardeners who are very much proponents of transplanting. Historically, we always direct seeded our beets because it is so much more efficient, and they're actually pretty dense. So when it comes to switching over to transplanting, that's a lot of trays to seed. That's a lot of time planting. So it's kind of like, well, if it takes you 15 minutes to seed an entire bed of beets, like, why not? But then the issue, there's a couple issues. So one is the seed, even when it's pelleted, even when it's perfect, it still doesn't always drop 100%. Plus, you do get some that don't germinate. And then on top of that, because they're compound seeds and you can get multiple plants per seed, so you'd end up having this kind of like, gaps and then a big cluster of plants and then gaps. And at some point you kind of start thinking, that's not the most efficient use of your garden space, right? So we did switch to transplanting last year, and we got very nice beets. I think the key with transplanting, aside from being delicate, is you want to make sure that the roots, like the little stem parts, do get buried, because if they're above ground, you're going to get these really wonky looking beets that aren't nice and round. But if you bury them nice and deep or you hill them up, you can get pretty nice round beets. And then we're getting, pretty much a full bed every single time. So then it's like, there might be something to this transplanting thing with the beets. So it is something, like, definitely if you're struggling to germinate beets, or if you're spending a lot of time thinning them or things like that, I would certainly give transplanting a try. It can be quite successful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now, have you started any of these inside yet?
No, the only one that's kind of calling me is the onions.
Yeah.
I know some people plant onions like up to like 10. So our average...
Mine are started in the basement right now. They're going. My onions.
Nice. That's exciting. Our average last frost date is May 11th. Kind of the safe date is usually a couple weeks after that, depending on the crop. So the onions is the only one that's kind of like, maybe in February, but we're kind of in the thick of things here. So even with onions, it kind of depends on how large you want your onions to. If you want like maximal size onions, you can start them really early. But if you're, going for more like medium size, you can plant them a little bit later and still end up with decent size onions. So yeah, it's coming. March is going to be the crazy, like, pull your hair out month. So how do you do your onions? Do you do them in flats or in cells?
So last year I had a 72 cell tray that had like air pruning, one of those from
like a wind
Bootstrap
strip.
Farmer.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and so I did like two seeds in each, and then I got like 100% germination, and then I had to thin them out and like pull them apart. And I had 3 trays, so one tray per variety. I was growing Red Mountain, Walla Wallas, and a Spanish onion. All of them are long day because I'm in New England. This year, I was just defrosting the freezer, and I've got so many onions in there, and then there's still a bunch hanging in my cellar. So I'm like, okay, I don't need nearly as many onions this year. So I'm just growing like one tray, and I'm trying. It's just a plain tray, no dividers, and I'm just trying to grow them all just in the dirt, and then I'll thin them out. Germination has not been as good as I had last year, though. So I don't know, but I don't need as many onions this year, so I think it'll be fine.
And how did you find, you trimmed your onion tops last year? So how did you? There's a great debate about trimming versus not trimming.
There's a YouTube video. Yeah, I put out a YouTube video where I trimmed them. It worked just fine. It's I think that the problem with trimming them that people say is that it could introduce disease. Because then the tops are open, and then like germs and bugs might get in. But if you're just gonna trim them and then keep them inside in your seed starting area, they're gonna be fine. They're not gonna get germy, especially if you do bottom watering to water them. Mm-hmm. So my onions turned out great. I had a huge harvest, so you really can't argue with the results. Trimming them was just fine, and I trimmed them twice actually. So
oh wow, nice.
Yeah, down to like about 2 to 3 inches is what you want to trim them, and they handle it just fine. It's kind of like cutting the grass, it grows back. Same with the onions.
That's awesome. Yeah, and there's a little bit of a trade-off too. Like some people say, oh, it takes more time to trim them. Mm-hmm. But actually, I think a lot of the origins of trimming really come from efficient planting, and even like putting them in mechanical planters. And like definitely if you're starting a big tray of onions, like how the tops just want to like
they
tangle
want
into
to
each other.
they want to flop over, and then uh, the the Mi Gardner on YouTube, he was saying that if they flop over, then they might want to bolt or go to seed sooner. So by trimming them, you prevent that a little bit. I don't know how much truth there is in that, but it worked for me. I didn't have too many trying to bolt on me. So yeah.
Nice.
Uh, Aaron, are you done? Should I talk about my
Yeah,
gardening plan?
I think we're good.
All right, I'm gonna switch over to the live app. Here we go, and I need to find it on my computer screen. There we go. So,
You have
uh,
a pest magnet garden?
pest
It's
magnet.
the
Okay,
first
so let
thing
me
I
explain
saw.
this. So, actually, I'll get rid of
Why
I'll
would
get
you
rid of
have
this real
such a
quick
thing?
and just focus. This is where I'm putting a new garden. These trees, a bunch of them, not this one right here, but the ones in the background. Um, there we go. We're going to be making a space on our property to actually have a garden because currently there's way too much shade for a garden. I tried the first year we moved in, and the sunniest spot only gets about 2 hours of sunlight. Um, so this way, we're utilizing the space by the street that's already cleared, so we get a few hours of sunlight from that, and then we're clearing the trees between myself and my neighbor, and their lawn is cleared, so we're getting taking advantage of that sun. So we'll end up with about 6.5 hours of sunlight, which is good enough, I think,
Hmm.
for growing a garden. So in this transition year, I'm still keeping the community garden plot, and I want to compare how this new garden at home does to the community garden plot. So as part of that, I've got several test gardens. So let's go into pest magnets first. So I want to test how um, the community garden compares to my home garden for pests. So at the community garden, there is every pest imaginable and a lot of them because they have a lot of food to eat. They have the variety. You're right next to a garden that probably has the pests. If not, it was growing in your garden last year. So the one um, problem plant that I have every year is cucumbers and squash. The squash vine borer, the squash bugs, the beetles, and the Colorado potato beetle, I think, is the one that transmits disease to the cucumbers. So there's just a ton of bugs that have been wreaking havoc on every attempt I make to grow cucumbers and squash. And last year I got rid of a lot of that problem by putting an insect netting over the whole bed, and that worked until the flowers started blooming, and then I needed pollinators to come in and pollinate. So had to remove it, and then within a few weeks they were just crawling with bugs. So I'll be growing the same exact garden plan at home and at the community garden plot, and I'm just going to be able to compare like apples to apples how it does. So
Hmm.
we'll see if at home there are fewer pests, or maybe it's gonna be like the one thing that they can eat, so it'll just get hit harder. Who knows?
Now, have you seen the pest at your home yet?
No, just because there's just a bunch of oak and beech trees, and the nearest garden is um, 2 houses down, so 3 houses down. Yeah, so
That
yep,
was one of the things that I was most fascinated by. It's these pests that, specifically target certain crops are pests that I've never seen before. But as soon as I start growing vegetables, they know where they are and they show up in mass and
yeah.
just wipe things out. So it'll be interesting to see what your experience is there.
Yeah, we'll find out. And I do wonder, like this isn't a great experiment because it'll be brand new soil here at the home garden and soil that I've been using. for multiple seasons at the community garden. Um, and then also a lot of these pests, they'll overwinter in the soil. So maybe this year I'll be fine at home, and then next year is when they'll really hit. So I'll definitely keep everyone updated on that next year, see how that does.
I, I,
Um,
I suspect you might have some luck. We actually had the same thing with the market garden. So couldn't grow cucumbers within the market garden
mhm.
because of the cucumber beetle. But then the owner, he also had, a decent amount of land at his home property. So he would grow the cucumbers there and apparently had a lot less pest pressure that way. So
Oh,
I think you might be on to something. And I think even if they do find it in a few years, I don't think it'll be quite as rampant as at the community garden. But it's an interesting experiment for sure.
hopefully, yeah. Um, so the next one I'm going to talk about is the full sun veggies. So, as I said, this home garden will have like 6.5 hours of sunlight. Um, the community garden is just in a field, wide open, gets sun all day. So I want to see how the tomatoes and peppers and tomatillos do without full day sun. They'll just have most of the day. So we'll see. I'm growing a lot of sauce tomatoes because I just love making salsa. So there's aromas, there's San Marzano, there's I've got 4 different varieties of tomatillos this year. So got the purple tomatillos, the regular green ones. I've got a Amarillo red, not red, Amarillo yellow one, and I've
They're
got another
so
one.
cool.
I've got
Those
another
yellow
yellow
ones.
one. I've got another one that's yellow that's the size of a plum tomato. So I'm really excited. I love tomatillos. I make tons of salsa with them. They're great. So
When
I'm
they get to that size, do they still have that outer covering with them?
it kind of falls off.
Okay.
This will be my first year growing them, so I'm not sure. Aaron, have you grown them before? The big
I
ones I'm talking
haven't
about?
grown those big ones. I know the ones you're talking about. I have not grown those big ones. I've only grown the traditional purples and the greens, like the Toma Verde. Um,
Here,
and yeah, basically either the husk pops open completely, or sometimes it'll stay closed, but the tomatillo is like completely filled it out.
here's
Um,
the big ones, the Chupon de Melanalco.
those
Okay.
are crazy.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also growing, here's the Amarillo ones. Yeah, you can see all the varieties if you add them into your like seed box and planter. It's great. So let's go
And I
back.
can see from your icon that you have a cage or trellis support system
Yep.
underneath. What are you using for that?
So that's just a standard tomato cage. So I found out that tomatoes don't grow well in tomato cages. Who knew? So I grow my tomatoes on uh, a cow panel that's kind of like slanted like this and then bent at the top. And then I string them with tomato, what do you call it? Tomato string?
Fine. Hmm.
Twine.
Hmm.
So then I have all these tomato cases left over from when wasn't as knowledgeable about gardening. So I use those for the tomatillos and it works just fine. And then I
They're
also,
like the perfect size for tomatillos.
yes.
I
Eh,
find they work great for peppers as well.
okay.
Oh, I haven't tried
I've never
that.
had I've never had great enough success with peppers to need a cage, which is just one of the problems I've been dealing with is not good peppers, no matter how hard I try. So, well, maybe this year will be different
Yeah,
at the home
I
garden.
would if you do have the cages just kind of sitting around, I
Mm,
would put them up where your peppers are. That is where I had trouble last year, is I did not have the surrounding support system. I used stakes, but my peppers, when they finally came in, were so overloaded that the stems would break on the
mm.
really windy days. And
Mm.
that surrounding system, I could have then used some plant Velcro or something like that to support them. So I'd suggest giving that a try.
Okay. I used a lot of them with the cucumbers. I just put them on top of the cucumbers and help the cucumbers up on top of them. I know it's kind of unusual, but yeah. Uh, so then the next experiment I'm doing is with greens. So just like the tomatoes need a lot of sun, greens, if you get too much sun and too much heat, they'll bolt. So this experiment is to see if that fewer amounts of sunlight, if that'll prevent a lot of bolting. So I've got a lot of lettuce, a lot of bok choy. I love bok choy, and then some red lettuce that I got for free from uh, a seed purchase last year. So, or maybe this year, can't remember. So those are the three experiment beds, and then I've got a bunch more that I still need to figure out for the rest of the community garden and the home garden. But these are the ones I've figured out so far. So
It's nice. It's nice to have a little bit of wiggle room too, like
mhm.
just to play around with. If you know, end up with extra seedlings, or you know, find some seeds in the back corner that you forgot you had, it's nice to have that extra space to play with for sure.
Yep.
And time wise, how are you planning to balance out, how much time you spend at the community garden now that you'll have a home garden that you can tend to every day?
Yeah, it's a good question. It th- that's actually one of the reasons I really wanted the home garden is because I just don't give the community garden even last year I didn't give it enough attention because I really should be there maybe every other day watering, and I in reality I only got there once to twice a week. So with this whole experiment, I'm going to keep that the same. I'm going to try to get there once, twice a week, just the same as I did last year. And the home garden's going to be automated for watering. I'm going to put it on a timer. So it'll get water just as much as it needs. And I think even with less sunlight, this is my prediction, with less sunlight but more consistent watering, uh, that'll do better than more sunlight and my inconsistent watering that the community garden sees. So
I had a feeling you were going to rig up some sort of fancy dancy watering system.
yeah,
After seeing
yeah.
what you did with your green stock, I was like, yeah, it's going to be all
Well,
automated and drip and
Those
I've
drip
got
kits are amazing. I've got them in
yeah,
90% of my beds, and they make watering so much simpler.
yeah. No, I'm excited about this whole thing still, but the problem is the trees are still there, so I haven't had time to actually build anything. But once they're gone and the snow's gone too, then I'll be out there figuring out what the drip system will look like. And I do have more green stalks too that I bought when they were on sale last year, that I'll put out there, and I'll do the same green stalk watering hack uh, for those. So
so when are the
excited.
trees gone?
They were supposed to be gone a month ago, but
Mhm.
it's been really cold and windy here, so it's hard for the tree crews to come out and deal with them when they're, it's not safe to be out there when it's windy. So soon, they say.
Well, you know how we were talking before about like using the lumber. I guess one thing, if they can't be turned into lumber, could also get wood chips. Maybe wood chips are very handy in the garden.
They did say they're gonna chip up a bunch of them for me, so I'll use that for the walkways. I have been thinking about using some of the tree trunks as let me switch. So it's hard to see, but the land does slope down to the street. Um, so using some of the tree trunks as like a retaining wall sort of thing, just to keep it more level and keep erosion down. So yeah, I've got a few ideas. And at my old garden, I do have some raised beds made out of pine logs, and I might do the same. The problem with that is that the roly-polies really like to eat dead, decaying pine logs. So every bed that I've made out of pine logs, it's just overrun with roly-polies, and then they come out and eat all the little seedlings. So, yeah.
Yeah, I had really bad luck with those one year when I was first starting. They were like, "Oh, they're harmless," and I was like, "No way!" Like those things decimated, especially the young seedlings before they really take off. I had to come out and there just be tops just chopped off. So they're way more damaging, I think, than what some people experience.
Yep.
Same with earwigs. Like earwigs are, considered
Mhm.
beneficial up to a certain point, but then we've had a few bad years here for earwigs, and they're just like they get in the pepper, like they literally like dig holes in the peppers, and then you have earwigs in your peppers. They'll get in your
Gross.
lettuce. Like, ugh,
Yep. Yep.
it's
We get
horrible.
them really bad here. And it's just anything that like, makes contact with the ground, but it's not, buried in the ground, you lift it up and they just go scattering. So I use diatomaceous earth, and there's a Sluggo Plus version that works for the earwigs and the roly poly. So that has been a lifesaver for me.
Yeah. My biggest pest last year was actually voles. So as I'm designing this new garden, I'm thinking about like all the places I can put hardware cloth to try to keep them out. It's gonna be like the Great Wall of China to, no one's gonna get in. So
What about deer? Because you're in a relatively woodsy area overall.
yeah, yeah. There,
What's
just 2 days ago, I saw 9 deer near my neighbor's house. So
oh
that's what actually they decimated the test garden I had when we first moved in here. I just woke up one morning and everything was chopped down in half at least. So all the pepper plants, tomatoes, everything. So there's going to be a tall fence around it to keep the deer out,
nice.
and the
That's awesome.
voles, and the squirrels and rabbits and chipmunks, everything. It's the forest.
It'll be fully enclosed
Yeah,
on all sides.
yeah. No, nothing will get in, even sunlight. So
Well, that's really exciting. That's a huge change for you, Peter.
huge for you too. I mean, you've got a whole farm you're going to be growing. Uh, it's exciting.
Yep.
Milan, you got to step it up. You got to double the size of your garden.
Yeah, I may try to squeeze in 3 or 4 more beds here this year. We'll see.
Nice. Nice.
All right. So we were gonna talk seed starting, but I think we're running at a pretty good length for an episode. So let's save that for the next episode, actually. But did you want to talk about before we go any of your favorite varieties that you're trying out this next year?
Ooh.
I
I
know I
talked
talked
about
about,
my tomatillos.
yeah, mine with the tomatoes, it's not one particular variety, but the decision to go determinate versus indeterminate is one of those things. I think, for small space gardeners, that double round of, planting, I think will work better than just trying to do a season long indeterminate crop that, they get beat up by the heat and the pests. I think making the switch to that, and same thing with like the cucumbers, instead of trying to do, months and months from one plant, doing either bush varieties for containers for cucumbers or that second round, I think is what I'm most looking forward to this year. Is I've done the research, I've got the theory. Now if I can actually get it time to implement it right, that's what I'm most excited about.
Very cool. And for me, I am actually standardizing my varieties a fair bit for a couple of reasons. One was just from a seed ordering standpoint, like it made sense to go with, kind of one source as opposed to picking and
Mhm.
choosing and then, paying shipping on a bunch of different things. And then the other thing is when you're growing so many different crops and then you have a lot of variation within those crops, it can start to get really complex. So just in the name of like simplicity and efficiency this year, I've got a lot of like old favorites. So like, San Marzano tomatoes, just the regular green Toma Verdes, the kohlrabi is pretty straightforward. I've got the purple Vienna and the green Vienna. So, or no, I think it's white Vienna actually. So a lot of standardization.
What is the plant that you've got in the bottom left of this plan? It's hard for me to see.
Oh, the blue one? Hold on. Let me see if I can dig that up. That is a
It looks like a
squash.
custom icon, maybe.
So no, it isn't. I don't think it is. Oh, I know what it is. I know how I finagled that. So I was looking for, I just wanted to have one unique winter squash. I didn't want to do the standard, butternut or acorn or something like that. I was like, if I'm going to do a winter squash, it's going to take, a lot of time and be slow to grow. I want to do something kind of cool, but again, it's just one of those chances to play around a little bit, but the flavor profile will still be pretty familiar. So I picked this one. It's called Guatemalan Blue. I have not grown it before, but I'm super excited about it. So it's supposed to have a very nice sweet flavor. It's a type of banana squash. So I'm super excited to give this one a try. That is probably one of the more unique varieties that I have in the plan.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Let me squeeze in one more question before we wrap up. And Aaron, I'll shift this one more to you. But one of the things that I've learned is we talked about varieties and picking seeds. I'm leaning a little bit more towards sourcing my seeds from companies that are a little bit closer to my area, because they're breeding varieties that are known to handle our conditions a little bit better, as opposed to just ordering from, all over the place. Is that something that you take into consideration when you are ordering your seeds?
100%. And for a lot of different reasons, one of which is exactly like you mentioned, like the local seed companies, they'll be offering things that are going to be successful in your area. And sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Like sometimes you read a seed pack and it doesn't really specifically say, exactly what region, this will do better in warm weather regions. This will do better in regions with shorter growing seasons. So you're kind of picking and choosing through information or doing a lot of research to try to figure out, is this actually a variety that does well in my area? So it just saves effort, to be honest, when you go to these seed companies and that they're attuned for your local growing climate. So most of what's available to you there is has a reasonable chance of being successful. So that's one. Another one is just, it's nice to support a local business if you can. I think, there's lots of great seed companies doing all kinds of great work everywhere. And it's good to support, all of them. But if there happens to be one that's local to you, I think it's kind of nice to give them some of your business. And then even just from a selfish perspective for the shipping, it's kind of nice. Some of the more far-flung seed companies, you can end up paying quite a bit for shipping. And, if you end up placing a few orders, my seed order got here within 2 days of ordering it as well. So there is something to be said for just having that local touch and just, being able to source those things quickly and economically. So yeah, that's something I'm really excited about. But again, there's so many different seed companies that have sort of different niches and different specialties. So it's not to kind of like bash one or the other. It's just, it sometimes can make life easier if you choose a local source.
Yeah, to your exact point, one of the things that I dialed in is I made sure I was getting some high heat variety tomatoes to try to deal with the summer heat that we get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I've seen a few gardeners on YouTube who grow in the more southern areas of the US, and a lot of the variety selection comes down to the heat and humidity resistance, and the pest and disease resistance is huge for those areas as well. So it is a balancing act. Like you want to pick the varieties that are exciting and appeal to you and appeal to, what you're going to do in the kitchen, but you also want the varieties that are going to produce and have success in your area. So
Agreed. Agreed. So I think we're gonna end the podcast here. Great discussion. So if anyone who's watching has any questions for us, please shoot us an email at question@planter.garden, and we'd be happy to answer it on the podcast. And until then, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and please subscribe, give us a like, review, all that jazz, and see you on the next episode.
See y'all
Bye.
next time.
Happy gardening.